Welcome to the Church of God Network podcast, everybody. I'm here this week with a very special guest, Mr. Victor Kubik. We have known each other for quite a few years now, actually, Mr. Kubik, since 2018, I believe, when I went and visited you all in Cincinnati. I think you were the first person that I actually met with in person about Church of God Networks. That was a really cool experience for me, and it's sort of you have a permanent place in my memory bank.
Well, thank you very much. It's really a privilege to be here, and I recall you extremely well. You kind of just bravely came to the office, and with my assistant and me, you talked to both of us, and I just really do remember the conversation well. What I remember most is your intensity and desire for something constructive and positive among the churches. And the thing is that you were very kind and I would say courageous, just to come and talk and have a lot of questions. And so as your name has cropped up since that time a number of times, it's just been a good feeling. And I've appreciated your podcasts. I appreciate the work that you do, looking over your website. And I just feel very honored to be asked to be on this podcast.
No, it's a pleasure. And we're also, just extending the same courtesy you gave us, because you had me on maybe, a couple months ago, in the end of the 2022 calendar year. That was a really cool opportunity and conversation. So we're getting you on our pod. And it's, you have a very unique story on, everyone does, but you especially on maybe half a dozen different fronts. Obviously, being a former president of the largest Church of God organization in our community is a unique perspective. You have very interesting connections with different parts of the world. You have nonprofit endeavors outside the church sphere. So if you would, could you give people a bit of a short introduction or background for you in terms of your Church of God experience and things like that?
Okay, yes, I appreciate the questions that you sent, because it gave me a chance to ruminate, over what to say and where to start. I mean, a lot of things could be started long ago. My first experience into what I call the Church of God world, as we know it, was probably about the age 14 or so, and it kind of was a combination of me having questions about life, especially about death and what would be beyond. And also, I was reading the Bible, and I was part of another large church, at least in our community, the Orthodox Church, the traditional Sunday-keeping church. And I just was having questions about the Sabbath, because we were going through in catechism class about the Ten Commandments, and it was remember the Sabbath day. And I thought for sure that's got to be Sunday. They just got it wrong, or just got lost in translation. And I just wondered about that. And I had a private talk with my priest. I thought I could clear it up very, very quickly. And I basically found that he said, no, that is Saturday. And the church changes to Sunday. Just that statement alone made me just really make a turn for who determines what's right and what's wrong. So that led to other questions about life beyond, the return of Jesus Christ, the kingdom of God being very literal on the earth, connected with prophecies. And that's where I started. And then I wanted to go on to Ambassador College. I began to listen to the World Tomorrow program. And in the middle of all this, I found out more about the Sabbath and about these doctrines that seemed to resonate as far as truth was concerned with me. And so then I went on to Ambassador College, and the way I found out about the church was by applying to Ambassador College. I had no idea there was a church. It was a radio program. It was called The World Tomorrow, and it was Ambassador College, and I thought that's all it was. There was no hint of any kind of a church.
That's a first. I don't think I've ever heard of someone whose story is I discovered the church through applying to Ambassador College. That's a good one.
Actually, at that year, there was a few other students that really had no church background whatsoever. One from Chicago, two from Chicago. They didn't even know each other. One from Detroit. They came to Ambassador College, and they basically came because of listening to the World Tomorrow program. And of course, you find out about the church. And the first visit I had from a minister was to interview me for college, and I had already been accepted. So he was kind of horrified, as though he should have been more on the ball or should have found out more. And so he just invited me to church as a result of applying to college.
That is
And
funny.
he said, do you have any questions? I said, yeah, should I go? I mean, it was the craziest interview of all. But anyway,
Yeah.
that's kind of my origins in a church. And then I went to Ambassador College I had gone to the University of Minnesota for a year, so I went through in 3 years. And actually was a very, very run-of-the-mill person, very average in college, and really was not even destined to be in the ministry. When they announced those who would be given assignments, I was not one of them. I was given a job in an office, actually to work in Jerusalem at the new church office there. But then all of a sudden they needed more people out in the field. They had a big upswing in attendance. They had these graduate school lectures that were given around the country, and hundreds of people came into the church just very, very quickly, and they were needing more ministers. So they asked if we could send out more ministers from the campus where I graduated, which was in Bricketwood, England. So that's where I started in 1969 in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and have been in the ministry all that time, and have gone in different directions within the ministry. In 1990, I was asked to work at the home office or headquarters at that time in church administration. And I had that job, which is a fantastic opportunity at that time. And then, of course, for the start of United Church of God, I've been very, very involved. So I think I'll just kind of leave it there.
Sure.
That's the introduction of how I got into the church. But the feelings and the faith that I have, the origins of it go back to about age 14, when I had questions about these big questions about what God says is the day of worship, his commandments, the kingdom of God, what is the human, what follows after death, all that type of thing. And all of a sudden came ringing true. And I would say that one of the articles that was most influential in my just saying, aha, this is it, is this the only day of salvation?
Yeah.
And it really made sense. I said, how could all these people just, be written off by God, and just a very, very few selected, and even the very few sometimes are not so hot.
Yeah.
I thought, how does that work? And then when you find out that God has a plan for all of mankind, and that he wishes all men to be saved. That's not just a platitude or a statement.
Yeah.
It is something that. So anyway, that's my story.
Awesome. Well, and I think a lot of people know you, if not most, from being the president of United up until very recently. And that's a very interesting perspective for someone to have. And I don't think they hear that kind of perspective or someone reflecting on that kind of experience too often. So I'd be curious, during your time as UCG president, what was like the most rewarding aspect of it, and versus what was the most challenging aspect of that role?
Well, first of all, just being president was an experience too. It was not something I had sought. I had already been working in the United Church of God in church administration, or what we call ministerial and member services. And I was very happy with that. I enjoyed that type of work, which is involved with a lot of human resource type things and development, and working. You're kind of a pastor to the ministers, and I really like that. But then our current president at that time, Denny Luker, all of a sudden got very, very ill and died after a very short illness. It was a very aggressive cancer that took his life for literally in weeks. And all of a sudden there was a vacancy for a president. And believe me, there are some people I know that would love to be president. And here I was sort of saying, who's going to be president now? Because Denny Luker and I were very, very close. And so what happened then is the council went out in its normal way to seek a new president. And I wasn't even considering it until one of the council members said, I want to put your name forward to be president. I said, I don't know if that's not me. I'm not one of those guys that, likes to be up there in front of the people and say all these important things. I said, I really didn't feel like that was my particular calling. no, I'll put your name in. Then I said, okay, well, we'll see what God has to say on it.
Mhm.
And after an interview, and I filled out my forms there about the stuff I did. Actually, I was surprised all the stuff that I did was involved in as far as work inside and outside the church. And so they interviewed me, and all of a sudden they announced later that evening that I was the next president of the United Church of God. And I remember going to my wife there. I said, honey, I said, what do we do now? I said, now what?
Uh-oh. Yeah.
Literally, because this is a job, and it was also something that we didn't have a good history with presidents. We've been harsh on them, and then one president died, and it was a position where you're very, very vulnerable. You're not
Mhm.
safe. Like, okay, we'll just see what happened. As it turned out, I went on to be president for 9 years,
Mhm.
almost 1/3 the history of the United Church of God, and I loved every minute of it. I really did appreciate the opportunity, and I would say that, since you're saying what was the most rewarding thing of my work, was communications and relationships with
Mhm.
people around the world. And whenever I communicated, and that wasn't much for standing up and giving a lot of public sermons and that type of thing, and just giving that type of thing. I didn't really want that much. I just really wanted to connect with people on their needs, and being a work that's not about me, not my importance, but it's about them. How could I serve them? And I would say the most rewarding thing is to come to understand that people are important, that their needs need to be met, and they're looking for leadership that will really give them a hug. you you want a church where your leader gives you a hug, and they know it, and that he really is very concerned about you, that what he's saying is not something to make him look good, but something to uplift the church.
Mhm.
And the most rewarding thing is that communications and also travel and visiting people. I
Yeah.
had visited all the church offices, and I was going to visit one more until COVID came, the last one, which was the
Yeah.
office in France. But I didn't get I didn't get there. But I, in my work, all through the ministry, I visited 55 countries, all 50 states, all continents, and I just really feel like it's been a wonderful experience in my life to be able to have all this. So that was the most rewarding thing. People, people, people,
Yep.
people. I really did. I really still do love people. Have a lot of connections, and even though I'm retired right now officially, I have more stuff going on right now than I did almost as much as going on before. I have my own podcast. I do my own writing. I do
Yep.
all kinds of things that I really enjoy.
Yeah, and so you mentioned the podcast. That's another thing that you're really active in now. You have Life Nets, which I know you founded quite a while ago. Which I'm curious to hear more about the history of Life Nets. It's one of the few nonprofits that exists in the Church of God space that isn't a church in and of itself. There's a handful of them, but it's sort of a unique organization within the Church of God community. But before we move on to that, was there a particular aspect of being president that was maybe not the most challenging, but a surprise challenge? Because I know for me, when you embark in any sort of endeavor, you go in with certain expectations about like, oh, this is what I should expect for like challenges or roadblocks. And then you get in there, and it's very often not what you think the difficulties are going to be. So in your case, what was maybe something that surprised you about the position that was challenging?
Well, I would say this, that I said that the most rewarding thing was people, and the most challenging thing is people.
That's good. That's a great answer. That's a great
you know,
answer.
either you find out about people, you find out about motives, you find out all kinds of things about people, and you learn. I would say that the thing that you learn through all this is, what would Christ do? How would Christ handle the situation? How would he deal with somebody who's, let's say, mean or not well intentioned, or who's a bully, or who's not afraid to speak evil against you or others. And so how would you handle it? How do you love people that are contrary? I know one seminar I attended with one of our department managers was working with difficult people. We do work with difficult people, not necessarily in our work, but all around us we have people that are difficult to work with. So I'd say that certain aspects of just people things, dealing with human nature, and dealing with my own human nature, dealing with your own self and how you react to this. And as far as challenges, the disappointments that I've had is that, in fact, I think it's what's really given rise to CGN, is a disappointment with how all the churches just can't get along. Why can't we just all get along? We're all Christians. We have the same Bible. We could be the true church, but are we true Christians? That's the statement that I have. We make a big deal out of the fact that we know the truth, but we don't always practice the truth, and we don't sacrifice for the truth. We have a lot of the nature that is so contrary, and things that we don't like in others we have ourselves.
That's such a great point too, because one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is just that I think we all have this expectation of what it should be like to be in God's church, or to be with a group of people that, whatever you want to call it, is spiritually healthy. And I think I know young people especially struggle with it. I think they tend to also sometimes look outside of the church at other religious communities and sort of have this grass is greener on the other side sort of mentality. When in reality, you're dealing with people. It's never going to be smooth at all. And that's, I don't know if it's made to be smooth in the Church of God. I think it's sort of supposed to be challenging, because all of us, like you said, have human nature. It's meant to be rough, and we have to exercise certain parts of our conversion in order to deal with one another. And yeah, to your point, I do think we could be doing better at certain things, like loving one another in the church and working together. But the challenge itself, I guess, isn't necessarily surprising, but it is. I love that answer. The most rewarding thing and the most challenging thing was people. That's great. I love it.
I appreciate the fact that you, Dan, have created CGN for the purpose of bucking the tide, and not just kind of flowing along and just everybody kind of be in their own silo, but really trying to establish some connectivity in different ways, in the ways that might possibly work. So
yeah, and
I appreciate that.
And it's part of that challenge, right? And it's a good segue, because I admire people who take steps and create things or do things that maybe might not being done by that many people at the time. And so you're one of the few people in the church who has a podcast, and you're one of the few people in the church who's actually helped start up a non-church nonprofit, and it's called LifeNets. Many people are aware of it. If you're not, you have to check out LifeNets. They do great work. Could you tell us a bit about what LifeNets is and the kind of work you all do?
Okay, well, I appreciate you asking that question. One thing is that my work with nonprofits goes way back to maybe my origins. I'm a child of refugees that came from World War II. They're survivors. A lot of their friends, a lot of the people that they worked with died, in the war. And I came from a country that's been very oppressed. I'm Ukrainian. I speak Ukrainian. I didn't speak English until I was 5 years old. I didn't speak English when I was in kindergarten, but I did learn. And so that's my history goes back to working with people or being part of a group of people that were an oppressed nation. Then when I went to Ambassador College, actually worked in church administration there. There was some nonprofit work done through Ambassador Foundation. Mm-hmm. And actually, they had a project that we did in Radio Leningrad at that time. We worked with broadcasting there. And then we also worked with and we also worked teaching English in Western Ukraine. And we had a big group of Ambassador College students that went there in 1993, 1994 or so. And for several years, we had groups of people going there, and we did nonprofit work there. And so I learned through Ambassador Foundation, I was part of that. And then after the United Church of God started, there was all kinds of needs. There were people, there were refugees, Ukrainian refugees, that were expelled to Islamic areas that were being persecuted. And so I just thought, well, I've had this experience. Why not do something through my local church? And so we were trying to help these people who were being persecuted in Tajikistan, one of the Stan countries out there. And I had gotten to know about them through other Sabbatarians. That's a whole different story. I'm kind of rambling here. But I saw what the needs were. And so then through my church, we did that work. I was pastor of Terre Haute, which handled the finances for it, which were like $2,000 a year. It was not exactly a big, like Samaritan's Purse type of thing.
Yeah.
And so we started there, and then all of a sudden we had another challenge of Chernobyl that came up, and I met with a doctor in the church who was also an elder in the United Church of God. We met at the Feast of Tabernacles, and he was going to Chernobyl, and he wanted to know what I knew about Ukrainian work, and so we got to be friends. And then we just said, hey, let's go there together. This is at one dinner. This is our first meeting.
Yeah.
So I thought we were just kind of just talking. And sure enough, not too many months after that, we both did go to Chernobyl. And he was talking about after retirement, working with certain types of cancers over there. So now, all of a sudden, there were greater needs. He formed a foundation called Chernobyl Children's Trust. And I had my little piddly work here with just unofficially working with nonprofit in this way through a church's 501c3. But then through a very, very good friend, we still are very, very close. We have worked since Worldwide Church of God days, Michael Snyder. He offered to set up a nonprofit for us because he was the chairman of a nonprofit as well, to make it a 501c3. And also through other friends, through Jennifer Swenson, we were able to get a 501c3. She spent the summer going through the forms. This was back in 1999. And so we got our 501c3. That was a big, big plus. And I remember that in filling out the forms, they said, what's your website? Well, we didn't have one. Well, what's your budget for next year? And I said, what kind of budget, do I put down 2,000? We'll never get it, with that kind of a thing. So would you believe I put down $50,000? And $50,000 just came in like that. I thought, wow. To me, it was like God can do whatever, if you shoot high, God will shoot with you. And so with that money, we were able to relocate a lot of people from Central Asia to Ukraine, back to Ukraine, to get them out of harm's way. Then things developed with scholarships, and our director of the Spanish work asked me if I could help out with scholarships of students in Spanish-speaking area. This was Leon Walker at that time. And so I was on a council of elders and had a little bit of budget money, went down to Guatemala and El Salvador, and we started a scholarship program with 8 students in Guatemala and a number of students, I think 3 or 4 in El Salvador. And so that began our scholarship program in 2001, which has been running for 22 years. But LifeNets now is in its 25th year, and one project led to another. It's been so blessed, and we have had people from all groups that have been supportive and helpful of it. And I believe it's contributed to really a healthy sense even among the cogs, the Church of Gods, because if you don't want to talk about religion, or if you're tired of just all the hassle, you can still feed people. People in this group get just as hungry as other people get hungry. So you have common needs, and people have been able to help. And there's been a lot of groups. We've got a lot of support and help from groups that don't know really who to support and whatever, and they say that here's a donation from our church.
Yeah.
And I remember that one of the first big unity projects is that we wanted to buy some cattle for the interior of Zambia for our group, for
Mhm.
people that had lost their cattle to corridor disease, and the whole herd was wiped out, and so they had nothing to plow with, and it was very, very serious. And so one church, they were able to take some of the money from their treasury, and they sent me a big sum at that time, like $6,000. And I don't know if I can take this. I mean, we're just getting started here in United, and this is a lot of money, and people will say, why are you sending it to, for cattle? And they said, you take it. He said, that's the only thing we've agreed on.
Yeah, take the win. Yeah.
This is one thing that we have all agreed on we should be doing when they had disputes about other things.
Sure.
So that led to scholarships led to more scholarships. And right now, LifeNets is doing very well. We had a very, very good year. If you look at our annual report, we're close to $800,000 last year in various projects with Ukraine, especially, which we took on, which took a big part of that. With education, we have 108 scholarships that we support, not just for United Church of God kids. We have helped from other groups as well, and we've had other groups that have come to us, other fellowships, and said, we'd like to make a donation. Can you kind of maybe help somebody get a scholarship? How do you do it? What's the process? What's the process? How do you make sure that they actually go to school and all that? So we've been trying to be very, very helpful in giving advice in those areas.
That's great.
So we've done also, we have a lot of work that we do with water. When you go to Africa, you realize that water is life, and the supply of water is extremely critical. And we have some people that said, whatever you need for boreholes, for wells, we'll be glad to supply the financing for that. In one particular family, every time that we need a well, they usually run $1,500 to $2,000 or so. Please let us know. And so we do, we do that. But we have really a good base of support of people who do that. Also, I've studied at IUPUI, the Center of Philanthropy, and we've also actually had people not in the church, on our board from the Seventh-day Adventist Church until just this last year because of health, that have been extremely helpful. In fact, the one woman who we had on our board and her husband later on, she was a director of the Center of Philanthropy at IUPUI. And we kind of hit it off because she was a refugee from World War II, and so was I. And so we had kind of a common bond. She was from Estonia as a Seventh-day Adventist, and I was, a different Sabbath keeper. So I've had so many wonderful breaks as a result of people that I have known, and
that is the key. Yep. I mean, it's in the name, but I mean, networks are hugely important. I mean, in any part of your life, but in the church right now too, especially given how scattered we are. I mean, just knowing people and forming relationships, to your point, and you never know where those relationships are going to lead. Something as simple as having a common story leads to working together on a really positive initiative. And I think there's so many folks in the Church of God right now who want to be either a part of or contributing to something vibrant and, to your point, not something that's burdened by maybe some of the conflicts that we have in the Church of God, but just, hey, I want to know that we're doing something good and we're helping folks and we're moving the needle on something positive. So that's great. And you mentioned obviously your connection with Ukraine, having come there from there yourself. Another thing that I happen to know, I don't know many details about it, but you're in contact with a lot of Sabbath keeping individuals in Ukraine. And I don't remember exactly the number of folks that you said are in the region, but it's quite significant. How many people would you say are Sabbath keeping in that country that you're aware of and in contact of?
Well, we have came into contact with these people because some of them were people that came over in the early 90s. the United States. They came over on a Human Rights Accord visa that was founded by Jimmy Carter, president at that time. And so these people started attending United Church of God in Florida, and I met them, and they wanted me to. They said, we have many, many people back in Ukraine. And they said, you, Brother Victor, you need to go over there and visit these people. So I did a year later. Actually, I was going to that year, but that was the year that the USSR fell apart and Gorbachev was driven out of office. Yeah. I thought that was a bad year. So, but 1992, we did go over. Found out that there's 5,000 people who keep the Sabbath in Western Ukraine. Another 5,000 people in Romania, just across the border, that are Sabbath keepers, and 4,000 people in Moldova. It's that mountainous area called Carpathia or Transcarpathia that these people, live in. It's kind of an area that the Soviets just didn't pay attention to as much, and so they were able to practice their faith even in difficult times. So that's how I got to know about these people. Found out there's a whole network of churches, and really got to be very, very close. In fact, we work through these churches right now in providing aid to Ukraine. Yeah, with refugees. So it's been a relationship that has continued for 30 years, and I feel just as close with them, Dan, as I do with you or anybody else in the church.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. No.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an amazing thing, because there are certain regions of the world where, in terms of the known body of believers who are part of the Church of God or keep the Sabbath, seems to be small or sparse. But I think a lot of it too is just not having sufficient information, and especially you talk about former Soviet areas. I think there's just plenty of people who've been keeping it covertly or under the radar that we're not aware of. But it's so great to know that there are people making contact with those individuals, and that those are not small populations of people. I mean, you're talking thousands. So
there's thousands of people, and you find out their story about how they came to the Sabbath.
Yeah.
People sometimes feel like, oh, this was something passed down from one generation to another. No, not at all. It was just like, a pastor. This whole group out in Western Ukraine started because a Baptist pastor was, preaching on Sundays, and a woman came coming up to him and said, I had a dream. We need to be keeping the Sabbath. He said, get out of here. She came to him next week. I had the same dream. We need to be keeping the Sabbath. And so he says, third time, he says, even if you're right, I'm not going to do it because you're telling me to.
Yeah.
And so then he finally came to see that he needed to be keeping the Sabbath. He, in a sense, like we call him the Herbert Armstrong of Western, Ukraine.
That's great.
So he formed or was responsible for the formation of about 30 congregations out there. Whether he was totally responsible, his influence spread through that area. And so he is one of the ones that came to the United States and who I met. And he said, you need to go there and you need to meet with these people. And so he says, I feel like my mission is to come to the U.S. to connect here. So that's kind of my connection with those people. I have just, interestingly enough, I've been going through some old cassette tapes and try to convert them to MP3s. Hardly, you can't even find a thing to play them on. But I'm converting them to MP3s. I found 2 tapes of sermons that I had given in Pasadena after my return from my first 2 trips that are just so chock full of information, with excited information about me returning from those trips. And I'm thinking about making them into a podcast, just taking just taking the sermon itself and playing it, because there's just a lot of information that people ask me all the time. How are the Sabbatarians? How did you get involved? How'd you do it? And it's got a lot of that packed into a 1-hour sermon.
It's funny too, because a lot of this keeps going back to relationships and getting to know people and helping people, and that's certainly a theme so far in this podcast with you and your history. And I think we from both of our experiences know that folks get excited about that concept. You tell them that there's thousands of people in a different part of the world who keep the Sabbath as well. People get pumped about that. And what I didn't know at the time when I came and visited you all in 2018, but I have since found out, is that you have personally been supportive of quite a few of these sort of pro cross group fellowship organizations, whether informal or formalized, like Friends of the Sabbath. I believe back in the day, you spoke at one of their conferences. I happen to know some folks at the Bible Sabbath Association, and they said you've been supportive of them too. And of course, now Church of God Network. So, I mean, I can see the obvious connection that you're a big fan of meeting people and building bridges. But can you talk about why you are so passionate about relationships in the Church of God, and not only in the Church of God within your sphere, but across the various Church of God groups?
Well, as I said, that my biggest reward in being president was people and what people go through. And we don't realize all the things that every single one of us go through. And we need to realize that people hurt. Yeah. People are looking and searching. I feel those of us in leadership ought to be ones who help heal them and not turn on them. I feel like so many of the problems that have been caused in the churches have been because leadership has not been able to get along. I mean, that is not something that's a deep, dark secret. And that's why you have groups like yours that form around people at street level, at grassroots, to say, we don't know what the problems were with the church totally as far as the personality problems. What we want is our faith, and we want to have the common things that we observe. So I'm not going to get into that much, but I'm just saying is that we have one of the essences in our strategic planning in the church. We came to an outside firm to kind of analyze us and say what was most important to us. Yeah. And after a lot of study and after interviews and everything else, you know what they came up with? Meaningful relationships.
Yeah, I actually do remember that. I remember Gary Petty talking about that in a message. He's like, I could have told you that.
I could have saved a lot of money.
Yeah.
But anyway, we have meaningful relationships. That's what all of us want.
Yeah.
And we even had coffee cups made with meaningful relationships. People thought that was kind of maybe, a little bit frivolous, but it's not. It's very, very deep. It's very, very deep. People want relationships. That's what's very important. And I feel that the devil, the thing that he's wanted to destroy most is the connections between people. He's wanted to divide people. He wanted to make people mad at one another, upset. And what we are trying to do is have relationships because God is a family. God wants to add us to his family. That's relationships. And so we need to be very, very but I have worked with different groups. By working with different groups, I'll say that one of the groups that I started working with, even in the Worldwide Church of God, was Church of God Seventh Day. Yeah. And in my second or third year of working there, 3 of us came from the headquarters to their headquarters in Denver, just north of Denver. And to talk the first time in decades where we talked officially. And so they talked about Mr. Armstrong, about how he left them. They had very vivid memories of that. It was interesting to hear their perspective, and they said, it was just interesting, because they know exactly what we say about them. They say, you're a dead church. And they said, we're not a dead church. He told us, but we had a very, very good talk with them. In fact, of those relationships, I have maintained to this very day. In fact, after I talk to you, I'm going to be talking to one of them because one of them.
Oh, that's great.
So anyway, we 3 of us went up there and talked to them on 2 different occasions, and talk to their leadership, and talk to their people, talk to their editorial staff, and all that. And one interesting thing from them was a question on our second visit: why are you coming here to visit us? You're such a big organization, big TV program, big fancy campus and all that. What do you find in us? Because their main headquarters building was just a steel building. It really was nothing. It was nice, but it was nothing like ours. But they had, we developed friendships. We had so many things, in common. And and the big rift between them and Mr. Armstrong was over the holy days, which they still, have not taken on. However, they did pass a resolution not too many years back They call the holy days the other days.
Really?
And
The other days.
the other days.
Yeesh.
And, and so they had a couple groups that were breaking off from them because they were
Mhm.
keeping the holy days.
Yep.
And so they passed a resolution saying that, well, if you've got to keep those days, you can.
Mhm.
We don't want to lose you. However, we prefer you not to. That's kind of the way the resolution went.
Yeah.
But well,
I
go
was gonna
ahead.
say it is interesting that I've heard a lot of stories of, especially in the early days of Worldwide, where if members or ministers, people who graduated ambassador, were in parts of the country where Worldwide had not yet had any congregations, that they were encouraged to fellowship with Church of God Seventh Day. Like there was this. It's interesting because there was a level of cross group interaction with Worldwide and Church of God Seventh Day that I think would surprise some people today, given how difficult it is sometimes for some of us to cross those bounds. So it's cool to hear that you've done similar things, that you went and met at their headquarters, and I'm guessing this is what, like in the 70s.
No, this is 1992 or so.
Oh, 92. Okay, so
Yeah,
so
yeah.
later. Okay.
Yeah, and so and we maintain these relationships. We've been invited to be, we've been invited as fraternal delegates to their conventions. It's
Oh,
like a general conference of elders. They hold it every 2 years, and so I've gone to three of them. I've gone
that
to,
is cool.
and one of them, they presented a big check to us to LifeNets for helping out with the tsunami crisis in Sri Lanka. They said,
That is great.
you have people who live there. We have nobody in Sri Lanka. We have people all around the world, but not in Sri Lanka. And so I went up on the stage and they gave me a check for like $12,500. People clap. People says, "Way to go, brother." This was wonderful. This was just a
Yeah.
wonderful experience and very, very warm. We also invited them to one of our ministerial conferences in Santa Barbara and had them there. And it was just a very good feeling.
Yeah.
So, that's what I can say. But I could talk about some other groups that I have come to.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just it's an encouraging thing to hear. And what I found interesting is that, while Church of God Network, we do certain things that are designed to lower barriers or make it easier to connect. But one of the things we also want to do is to promote things and push out information when cross group fellowship or an interaction happens, because I think there are more occasions like that you just articulated than people realize. But because the information doesn't get out there actively, it reinforces people's mentality of, well, this is never going to change. We're never going to have more cross group fellowship. But in reality, like you said, you're working with Church of God Seventh Day. They're giving you a check to help support LifeNets. You're going to their conferences. We had Brian Orchard on for our last podcast, and he's actively involved with cross group fellowship in the Northern California area. So there are things going on that people don't always hear about. And what I have found interesting, frustrating on occasion, is that while to your point about the splits normally have coming from disagreements among leadership, which, yeah, I could definitely see, people tend to have this view that the only reason we are in this situation is because of leadership, which, number one, isn't true. I've seen plenty of lay members who don't navigate the whole desire for unity well. But also, the big thing is I don't think they give enough credit to people like yourself, to people like Brian Orchard, to so many people who we've been working with over the last few years who really want this, and many of whom have actively been doing it for a while. So it's encouraging just to hear your story of this. And in a related point, I was wondering, since you have that unique perspective of not only engaging in cross-group fellowship and working across groups and being supportive of groups like Church of God Network, what would be some of your advice to individual members who want to help out building bridges or relationships across groups, but do so respectfully? Because it is a tough issue to navigate. We want to respect leadership. We don't want to cause division. We don't want to cause issues. what would be your suggestion or your advice in terms of ways to do that respectfully and pitfalls to avoid in terms of when doing these things? I'd imagine one pitfall is like include your local minister in terms of what you're doing, like let them know what you're doing, don't catch them by surprise, stuff like that.
Well, a lot of that is varies from minister to minister too.
Yeah.
And people see kind of where I'm at, and I feel like things that I have done have not caused problems.
Right.
It depends upon the person, but there are several things that are very sacrosanct among the groups. The reason that you need to ask, why did this group form? What was the reason for its forming? Well, I'll tell you about United Church of God. I was there. I was one of the founders of the United Church of God. We had two big things. One was doctrine. The Worldwide Church of God changed big doctrines, such as the Sabbath, such as the kind of food we eat, and there's just a whole string of things that go on from there, just overnight, on people that had done and practiced those things for decades. And so we wanted to make sure that as we were cast out, in a way we couldn't continue fellowshipping there, that this wouldn't happen again. We had to have some kind of a fail-safe mechanism that would prevent somebody from walking in with some big harebrained idea about doctrine or prophecy and then create a following around him. That'll be a no-no. I would say that people need to be not so much proactively, but also very defensively, what they should not be doing. And one is bringing in new doctrine. And United Church of God has created kind of a very ironclad policy about what it takes to make changes in doctrine. It requires 3/4 of the elders, actually coming to an agreement on a particular point of doctrine to change. And very, very few things have changed from the original 20 fundamental beliefs that we have had. So I'd say be very careful about the doctrine. The other thing too, I said there were two, was that we don't want to have one strong man take over. And usually you'll find somebody who will bubble to the surface, who says, follow me. He may be somewhat semi-charismatic or charismatic, and looks cool and sounds cool. And so people follow him, and he starts giving orders, and then it goes to his head, and then, problems develop. We've had that happen, here too, in the early parts of United Church of God. But we did not want to have somebody who had so much authority to where with one signature or with one letter, major things happen. So to the point of your question is to what types of things should do. We should be very careful about, as we fellowship with people of like faith, who have big similarities, is not to impose our beliefs. And, the new beliefs come up all the time. Right now, there's a discussion about what Pentecost really means, or who was Christ, or what was Christ before his birth? Was he really, did he really the God of the Old Testament, and all this kind of thing? And that creates so many problems and sucks up so much of our time. And that was in administration. So I would say, please don't do that. If you want to get together, there are many things that we can talk about that are very common. Yeah. One of them is the Sabbath. One of them is the holy days, going to the Feast of Tabernacles. Maybe we don't understand all things, but just don't try to impose your doctrine. Or people come in with a particular view of a calendar or particular, other practice, and they want to impose it on others, or they bring in literature. And I would say that one of the difficulties I had in the COVID thing is we had the masks, no masks, then we had vaccines, no vaccines, and that just drives people crazy. So that divides people. So you have to ask yourself, first of all, don't do things that are that way. Yeah. But I would say that what can we do? I think that what you're doing right now is that you have a website, you have a network, you have people that you have a board, that people that talk to one another. I have felt very, very comfortable in talking to CGI, Church of God International. I've been visiting their headquarters a couple of different times. And would you believe that we've gone as far as inviting their director of their ministerial services to come and speak to one of our seminars? Training ministers. Some people would gasp if they even knew that, but we had him come and talk to our, we call pastoral development program. And that was very, very uniting. That was very, very healing.
Yeah.
They have talked about those things. We've had a combined service with them. I've spoken to a combined service in Cleveland. I've spoken to their church in Tyler, Texas. I've talked to their leadership. In fact, in one case, several of us went down to Tyler, Texas, and talked to them for supposed to be a couple hours, and it ended up being all day long.
Yeah, that's not a surprise with church people.
and we wanted to talk about common things.
Yeah,
I would like to just I found this letter here, which I really want to read. It's a very, very short letter.
Sure,
but maybe it doesn't answer all the questions about coming together. But people in leadership may actually be doing more. They've done some harm, but they also are doing some good.
Absolutely.
And I have gone with Denny Luker and others to the headquarters of the Living Church of God in Charlotte, North Carolina. And this was when visiting with Dr. Meredith. We had a very, very warm meeting. We had met with their leadership in Dr. Meredith's office, and he was very kind. We talked about what kinds of things we could do. Of course, there's always this tension about, who comes what and who's in charge and all that sort of thing. But and we talked about, how we could come together. The year or two after that visit that we had, there was an accident in Wisconsin. It was at their summer camp. Living Church of God had a summer camp.
I remember that. It was awful.
And Morgan Montgomery was hit by a speedboat and was killed. It was horrible. It was Living Church of God. I was president at the time, and my heart just sank. I felt so bad for them all. And so I wrote a handwritten letter along with Roy Halladay to Dr. Meredith. And we just expressed our sorrow and that this would happen in our group. And we just told them how we felt so badly about this. And I got a letter back from Dr. Meredith, and I would like to read that letter. It's very short here.
Sure.
But Dear Victor and Roy, this is dated August 11th, 2015. Thank you both very much for the kind note and card you sent regarding the death of Morgan Montgomery. That was very thoughtful, and perhaps God can use all of these tragedies now and in the future to help bring more of God's people together. We do need to pray for one another and hope that God will use us in his way to help people really understand his reality and the importance of the coming government of God over the earth. Thank you for your kind words and for coming to see us here in the past. Please thank any of the other office brethren who have contributed to this thought. And we will pray for you as you pray for us, as you indicated. In Christian love, Roderick C. Meredith.
Yeah.
I've read this at different conferences to show that it isn't all cold and distant,
that
they are these feelings of leadership, even wanting to, in some way, have the first little tentacles, grow out to kind of reach out to others and intertwine. So I felt like that letter really struck me. He's written to me on other occasions when I became president of the United Church of God. He made a point of, I'm not sure if he called me or if he wrote to me, but he said, Victor, you were in my class in Harmony of the Gospels class. And he said that I pray for you and I pray for the United Church of God. And I say, I want to let you know that I like your magazine. I read it all the time.
That's great.
So anyway, we had this relationships, and I had that warm relationship with him. When his wife died, my wife and I went out there, and they seated us in a special place there and had us for a special lunch afterward with their leadership. So that is taking place, and we need to build on those things.
Absolutely. And that's such a key thing too, because there is so much to build on, and there's the desire at all levels, leadership, lay member, to do this. I just think for so long people have really not known what they can do to move the needle in a positive way. And I think, to your point, building on the foundation of these events by, when you do go and visit someone else, not imposing your particular views, right? Like, no matter what it is, no matter how right you might think you are, for building the relationship, focus on what you have in common. Not to say that down the road, once you have a really good, close relationship, you might be able to talk about those things and work it out, right? I mean, Worldwide went through different changes of belief as they came to understand Scripture, whether it was what day to keep Pentecost or any number of things. But when we are at a point where we are just trying to get to know one another and to form relationships and meaningful connections, we should not be starting with, okay, I'm going to come into this group and I'm gonna really hammer what we disagree on, because I think we all need to be grounded in Scripture and what we believe, but we shouldn't feel this need to convince someone else, especially if we believe that they are going through the conversion process the same as us. Like, I don't think God wants us to be used as the hammer to smash someone else into submission on a doctrinal point. I think building those relationships is the best first step. So I really appreciate that bit of advice. So with that, we're right at a little before the hour mark. So I know there are a lot of things you're probably doing right now that can be plugged. Do you have a few podcast guests lined up? Or is there anything on the docket coming out within the next couple of weeks you want to promote?
Well, just want to promote the Kubik Report podcast. I have a number of podcasts coming up here with Tim Pebworth with the French work.
Oh, great.
Coming up, I have another one about retirement. We had one from Carol Emerson Hill about planning for retirement and what to expect after retirement. She and I talked very candidly about what feelings we had after we came to retirement. And so we had part one, but just like talking to you, there's just, you feel like there's a lot more to say.
Yeah.
So we have another one coming up next week. I have a whole string of them with our pastor in Cleveland, about leadership, Greg Thomas, about leadership. We've done 10 podcasts that have been very well taken, that he repurposes on his leadership Facebook, his leadership YouTube page, YouTube channel. So that's been very, very successful, and we've had very, very good comments about that. I have people here in the community. Our new police chief, who's our neighbor here, I've spoken to him before in our podcast. He's spoken to our ABC students, cool. Just really, really fine person. So I'm looking for people inside and out, and also anybody who would like to be on a podcast. I'd like to do another one with you.
Here. Absolutely.
In fact, if you allow it, if this comes out the way you want it to, if I could post it on my podcast.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
To get the word out. So anyway, that's it's easy to find. You just go to any address along on any browser, type in the Kubik Report. Spell Kubik correctly, please. Kubik. That's why people can't find it sometimes, because they misspelling that word. But you can find it on Spotify. You can find it on Pandora, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Audible, every conceivable platform. I have it on those platforms. So please do that and spread the word about the Kubik Report. With LifeNets, go to the lifenets.org website, and you can see all the programs we do. You see it's kind of heavy on Ukraine right now. I have one of the tabs is the war blog, and I have reports almost every week about things that people are doing. And I'm posting one today, if I have the time, that just came from the group of these Sabbath keepers in the West. A group of volunteers drove out there with the humanitarian aid out to Bakhmut area. They went out there in the war zone and delivered goods to people, especially to elderly that are in the villages where utilities have been cut off for months. In one case, there was no utilities for 6 months. these elderly people. So they bring food to them, and they bring some needed items of medicine and everything that they need. So you can follow LifeNets and all the other programs that we do. So again, there's just lots of things that that we do, and I'm just very happy for the support and the prayers from people, and I want to be supportive and helpful and encouraging to the next generation. I'm from a generation, I've served 56 years in the United Church of God, starting in 1966 when I went to college, and then 3 years as training in the ministry, and then 50 years service in the ministry itself. And I've held, I said, every job that there is in the United Church of God, with president, director of ministerial services, with media. And I'm still very involved with the Council of Elders. I was voted back onto the Council of Elders and made chairman of the media committee, which I really enjoy doing, because there's just ideas that I have that where I want to be helpful in promoting our message and working with others. And what I really appreciate is the podcast that you have. And I heard that there are other podcasts that may be springing up too, which I applaud. I know that every day there are 3,000 new podcasts out there. 90% of them fail.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I appreciate people who really go to the effort of wanting to talk to people and have that. So I've just wanted to say that. So that's Absolutely. My concluding remarks.
Sure thing. Absolutely. Everybody, you got to check out the Kubik Report. Got to check out LifeNets. They do great work, great interviews on the Kubik Report. You're very prolific with your interviews too. I mean, we do like once a month at CGN because of what it takes to plan and record and edit them. But you're churning out quite a few, several a week sometimes. So I admire the tenacity. But people got to check it out. It's a great podcast. One of the few in the Church of God. And I hope that changes, like to your point. Hopefully a lot of folks start coming up and having conversations and doing podcasts. But we're speaking with one of the pioneers on that front right now, Mr. Kubik. So we appreciate you coming on, all the support, all the work you've done throughout your career in the Church of God. And thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you. And I really applaud your work, applaud your work, and want to follow it even more closely. And I love what you're doing. I love the spirit of what you're doing. Here it is, 5 years now since you came for the first time.
Yeah.
And so some people might be discouraged and say, "Fooey, it's not working," but you're staying with it, and that's very good. And I appreciate the group of people that you're working with. You have a lot of support for a heart for what you're accomplishing.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Mr. Kubik. Take care, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Take care.